Fallen Order's combat was fun, showy, and definitely cowl focused, highlighted by the flashy finishing moves you could pull off. Your arsenal of moves felt slanted to more one-on-one battles and crowd control moves against less aggressive crowds, as to center the focus around Cal himself. All effort was focused on what actions Cal might take next. Like I said, his finishing moves are a prime example of this, but there are more factors, such as groups not applying any sort of rush tactics, ranged enemies not being bothered by the team damage they can do to each other, and captains just throwing the grenades willy-nilly all near their teammates. Enemies flank you but do not fire since you're dealing with their friends, and of course the plenty of times multiple enemy types fight each other instead of you, then you choose when to drop in. This isn't a bad thing, of course. In fact, it makes the game feel extremely fun by completely immersing you into your role as someone learning to be a Jedi, truly making you feel like you're taking down many enemies across an expansive map on your way to your next stop in your adventure. Particularly because the combat is so focused, a la Sekiro, the enemy's moves, tactics, and patterns especially catered to this, as you became the singular focus. This is key in allowing you to pull off some badass moves, making gameplay feel really good the first time you pick it up. Mastering the patterns, getting better at the dodges, nailing those parries, this makes you feel like a Jedi learning his way through the combat. But doing things this way, the right way, definitely has a ceiling, and it comes much quicker than the other games I've played recently. Even the bosses can be boiled down to learning their moves and memorizing their patterns. Once you reach that edge of the ceiling, you might start to realize just what potential the game has if it is expanded in terms of combat. Take the force moves, for example. In combat, these are wholly unnecessary and even break the pattern of attack for most enemies. It feels like they serve one purpose, a quick way to deal with one or maybe even multiple enemies without having to do so much more. Sure, it is cool to see how the high level purge troopers deal with them with their unique animations and such that show their resistance to them, but ultimately the most they do is some damage to you at the end, and they mostly just reinstate the set moves that the troopers did before. Almost like they're saying, alright, that force move was fun and all, let's get back onto the one-on-one combat now. Other enemies are easily dispatched with force moves, allowing easier access to one-on-ones with the remaining troopers, and bosses are mostly resistant to them, opting to get back to physical combat for the majority of the battle. Again, don't get me wrong, I think they nailed the all-out physical one-on-one lightsaber combat. If this game didn't have force moves in fights and only outside of them, I wouldn't regard it as any less great. It just shows how the encounters are designed in such a way that force moves are meant to help out but ultimately be unnecessary. This is probably why all force moves in battle consume a consumable resource in the form of your force meter, and are not necessary as you might not always have any available. However, when you see clips of people really relishing the combat and seemingly having the most fun, it is always way beyond the simple lightsaber slices, but rather pushing the game up to that ceiling and messing around with the physics and force powers. Take Jaquan the Jequel and their video. It is mostly just them messing around with the force powers and finishing moves, completely breaking the combat scripts and showing off the small amount of force powers that actually incorporate the lightsaber, like the throw. It certainly is fun as hell to do so, and I think there are changes that can be made to the combat so that it matches this tone for most of the encounter's length themselves. Watching compilations like that where the combat is more playful is what I would like the franchise to head towards. That tone shift or clash or whatever is already present in Star Wars material, most obviously with the droids and the Clone Wars in general. Shifting from a playful banter to emotional fighting is present across the galaxy far away, and having more playful combat flow into serious boss fights would not even cause anyone to blink an eye really. In fact, it would help ground the boss fights even more as you're suddenly focused or forced to focus more on the lightsaber combat and learning the personality of their fighting style instead of having to rely on the more playful aspects that could be achieved with the lowly stormtroopers. Plus, I think anyone who has played the games before would recognize just how playful the stormtroopers are already with their dialogue. Even the purge troopers' overconfidence is played off in a goofy way that makes sense and makes it more oddly satisfying to face off against them, even if you do dial out to the one with the size. That fucking guy always gets me so fucking fast. Anyway, okay, how to make the combat more playful. First step, give the troopers ability to interact with one another beyond the fact that only rockets and grenades from themselves can damage each other. Imagine just how funny it would be and useful if you could get between two enemies, line up their attacks and dodge at the right time to get them to whack each other. If the enemies are programmed to recognize they can do damage to their teammates, there will be more incentive to program them with tactics to avoid such moves, making them more formidable opponents already. This can also provide more unique banter as they can scold each other from nearly hitting each other or actually hitting each other. Second step, this can work the other way as well. Introducing team moves among the troopers to help them take you down can display some delightfully playful moves that could require more thoughtful tactics to counter. Maybe two scout troopers can link up, running right next to each other as they rush you and swing the batons at the same time for double the damage. You can get creative with just that move right there. If you manage to parry the move like that in a more limited time window, maybe the impact of the saber against the batons can knock them both back to the ground, opening them up. If you manage to dodge back at the right times, their batons might smack together at such a velocity as to stun them both and instantly drain all their stamina. Or you could do something very characteristic of this game already and roll around them and their extremely focused charge, landing behind them and then pushing them off a cliff together as they wouldn't expect it. These team moves can introduce such playful mechanics, spectacular visuals, and even a challenge to the battles that can become generic in this game already until you spice them up with force powers or whatever. Having the troopers think with each other would just add some more variation that would be most welcome. Step 3, why not allow the troopers to take weapons off their fallen comrades? They wouldn't be good as good with them. For example, if they're not part of the class, a scout trooper might pick up an E11 blaster, for example, and would have the accuracy dropped in half or more, and a trooper captain can be adept at aiming, would only have limited moves and damage with a scout baton, vice versa as such. Hell, to make it more playful, base troopers who pick up the minigun in panic wouldn't be able to control the recoil at all and would end up bouncing all over the place in a fun little animation that would bring some levity to the situation. Why would a trooper pick up a weapon they're not familiar with? Well, a disarming mechanic would also be a great and dynamic addition to the sequel, but I see no reason to believe a trooper, especially in more playful battles, wouldn't think to themselves that a certain weapon would work better in certain situations. Like maybe a blaster trooper sees all their fellow blaster troopers' bolts deflected back at them, so they decide to arm themselves with a baton to avoid that fate and maybe take you down. I also imagine it isn't a stretch to see why troopers would think a rocket launcher or minigun or any of the purge troopers' powerful weapons wouldn't be super helpful in a battle. Also, it would be funny if some of the bigger creatures could just pick up troopers or other creatures and just chuck them at you. However, adding spectacular, ridiculous, and more playful moves, tactics, and approaches to combat would change up the dynamic of the whole game in a more positive direction. It would keep players on their toes and open up a whole lot more fantastical combinations beyond anything that is really found in the current game. Eventually, the combat gets stale in this game as you rerun through the same combat encounters. Adding some levity along with these inevitable new moves and tactics could add some much needed enjoyment and fun moments that could really cement the games into the zeitgeist of the gaming landscape, as was done by games that employed similar tactics like Metal Gear 5 or Breath of the Wild. It wouldn't even be a mismatch of tone as shown by the banter already present in game, such as the humor found between the stormtroopers and in the story in general. Having something gameplay related to match could easily elevate the game into the high enjoyment categories and boost its popularity.
Watch out! We shall run you down! You're just in my way!